The Arizona Territory sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Jack Morrison guided his worn-out wagon across the endless expanse of desert scrubland. It was September 1885, and the heat seemed to rise from the red earth in shimmering waves that distorted the horizon into a cruel mirage of false hope. Beside him on the wooden bench sat his 8-year-old daughter Emma, her small frame wrapped in a threadbare dress that had once been blue, but had faded to the color of dust and desperation. Her dark hair hung limp around a face that had grown gaunt over the past 3 months of hard travel, and her brown eyes, so much like her mother's, held a weariness that no child should ever have to carry. "Papa," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst, "how much farther to California?" Jack looked down at his daughter and felt his heart break a little more. They had been traveling for nearly 4 months now, ever since the bank had foreclosed. On their small farm in Kansas, the drought of 1884 had destroyed their crops, and without income, they had lost everything: their home, their livelihood, and most painfully, Jack's wife Catherine, who had died of pneumonia during the brutal winter that followed their financial ruin. "Not much farther, sweetheart," Jack lied, knowing they still had hundreds of miles to go before reaching the promised opportunities of California's Central Valley, just past that next ridge. "Probably," Emma nodded weakly and leaned against her father's shoulder. In her small hands, she clutched the only valuable thing they had left, a delicate silver necklace with a small turquoise pendant that had belonged to her mother. Catherine had received it as a wedding gift from her own mother, and it was the one item Jack couldn't bring himself to sell. Even when they were desperate for food money, their old horse, a mare named Stella who had seen better days, plodded along the dusty trail that passed for a road in this desolate part of the territory. The wagon creaked and groaned with each rut and rock, and Jack worried constantly that it would break down completely, leaving them stranded in the middle of nowhere. They had started their journey with high hopes and modest provisions, but bad luck had followed them like a persistent shadow. In Colorado, thieves had stolen half their remaining money. While they slept, in New Mexico territory, Stella had gone lame for 2 weeks, forcing them to stop and spend precious resources on veterinary care. And now, in Arizona, they were down to their last few dollars and barely enough food for 3 more days. "Papa, I'm so hungry," Emma said quietly, as if she were ashamed to complain. Jack reached into their dwindling food sack and pulled out a piece of hardtack, a rock-hard biscuit that was more like eating wood than bread. He handed it to Emma along with their last apple, already showing brown spots, but still edible. "Here, princess, eat slowly so it lasts longer." Emma took the food gratefully and began to nibble at the hardtack, trying to soften it with small sips from their nearly empty water canteen. Jack watched her struggle with the meager meal and felt the familiar surge of anger and self-recrimination that had plagued him throughout their journey. He should have been able to provide better for his daughter. He should have found work in Kansas instead of gambling everything on this desperate migration west. He should have done something, anything, to prevent Catherine's death and avoid the circumstances that had left them homeless and nearly penniless on this unforgiving frontier. As the afternoon wore on, Jack began to recognize landmarks from the crude map he carried. According to the last travelers they had encountered, there was a small settlement called Copper Creek about 10 miles ahead. It wasn't much, just a few buildings clustered around a played-out mine, but it represented their best hope for finding work, supplies, and perhaps a place to rest before continuing their journey. "Look, Emma," Jack said, pointing to a thin column of smoke rising in the distance. "See that smoke? That means there are people ahead. Maybe we can find some work there, earn enough money for proper food and supplies." Emma shaded her eyes with her small hand and squinted toward the horizon. "Will there be other children there, Papa?" "I don't know, sweetheart, but maybe." The truth was that most mining settlements in Arizona territory were rough places inhabited primarily by single men seeking their fortunes in silver and copper. But Jack didn't want to discourage his daughter, who had been starved for companionship, as well as food during their long, lonely journey. As they drew closer to Copper Creek, Jack could see that the settlement was indeed small and rough-looking. There were perhaps a dozen buildings scattered around a central area, a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, and several smaller structures that might have been private residences or business establishments. But what caught Jack's attention immediately was a large, well-maintained house set apart from the main cluster of buildings. It was painted white with green shutters, had a proper front porch with rocking chairs, and was surrounded by a garden that somehow managed to flourish, despite the harsh desert climate. "That's a pretty house," Emma observed, following her father's gaze. "It is indeed," Jack agreed. "Whoever lives there must be doing well for themselves." As their wagon rolled into the main street of Copper Creek, Jack could feel the curious stares of the townspeople. A man with a young daughter was an unusual sight in these parts, and their obvious poverty and travel-worn appearance made them objects of interest and speculation. Jack pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store, hoping to inquire about work opportunities and perhaps purchase a small amount of food with their remaining money. But as he climbed down from the wagon bench, he noticed that Emma was swaying slightly, her face pale and her eyes unfocused. "Emma, are you all right?" Before she could answer, Emma slumped forward, unconscious from hunger and exhaustion. Jack caught her just as she began to fall, his heart racing. With panic and fear, "Help!" he called out to anyone who might be listening. "Please, someone help me. My daughter needs help." Several people emerged from nearby buildings, drawn by Jack's desperate cries. Among them was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes, wearing a simple but clean dress and an apron that suggested she had been working in her kitchen. "Bring her here," the woman said firmly, taking charge of the situation with the confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with emergencies. "I'm Ruth Patterson. That's my house over there, the white one with the green shutters. Bring your daughter inside immediately." Jack didn't hesitate. He gathered Emma in his arms and followed Ruth Patterson toward the well-maintained house. He had noticed earlier, as they walked, he could feel his daughter's small body trembling with weakness, and he fought back tears of desperation and helplessness. "How long since she's had a proper meal?" Ruth asked as they reached her front porch. 3 days. Jack admitted shamefully. "We've been living on hardtack and whatever we could forage along the trail." Ruth's expression softened with compassion rather than judgment. "Well, we'll fix that right away. Get her inside and lay her on the sofa in the front room." As Jack carried his unconscious daughter into Ruth Patterson's home, he was struck by the warmth and comfort of the interior. The house was spotlessly clean, furnished with handmade quilts and wooden furniture that spoke of care and permanence. The air was filled with the aroma of bread baking and soup simmering, and Jack's empty stomach responded with an audible growl. "Lay her down here," Ruth instructed, indicating a comfortable sofa covered with a colorful quilt. "I'll get some water and broth. She needs liquids first, then we can worry about solid food." As Jack gently placed Emma on the sofa, her small hand fell open, revealing the silver necklace with the turquoise pendant that she had been clutching throughout their journey. The necklace caught the light streaming through Ruth's front window, and the older woman's breath caught in her throat. "Where did she get that necklace?" Ruth asked, her voice suddenly strange and distant. "It was her mother's," Jack replied, not really paying attention to Ruth's tone as he focused on his daughter's pale face. "Catherine inherited it from her own mother. It's the only valuable thing we have left." Ruth moved closer to get a better look at the necklace, her face growing pale. She reached out with trembling fingers to touch the turquoise pendant, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Dear God," she breathed, "after all these years." Jack looked up at her sharply. "Ma'am, is something wrong?" But Ruth Patterson was staring at the necklace as if she had seen a ghost. Her hand pressed to her heart and tears beginning to form in her eyes. Whatever she was thinking, whatever memory the necklace had triggered, it was clear that their arrival in Copper Creek was about to become something far more significant than a simple search for food and shelter. As Emma began to stir on the sofa, her eyes fluttering open and her small voice calling for her papa, Ruth Patterson knelt beside her and gently touched her forehead. "It's all right, child," Ruth said softly. "You're safe now, but I need to ask you something very important. What was your mother's name? Your mother's full name?" Emma looked up at the kind stranger with confusion and weariness. "Catherine," she whispered. "Catherine Rose Morrison. But Papa says her name used to be Catherine Rose Patterson before she married him." The words hit Ruth Patterson like a physical blow. She sat down heavily in the chair beside the sofa, her face white with shock and her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Patterson," she repeated in a voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "Oh, dear sweet Jesus. You're Catherine's daughter. You're my granddaughter." The silence in Ruth Patterson's front room was deafening as the weight of her words settled over them like dust after a windstorm. Jack stared at the older woman in complete shock while Emma, still weak and confused, looked back and forth between her father and this stranger who claimed to be her grandmother. "That's impossible," Jack said finally, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "Catherine's mother died when she was 16. She told me so herself. She said she had no family left. That's why we never." Ruth wiped tears from her eyes with the back of her hand, her gaze never leaving Emma's small face. "Catherine thought I was dead because that's what I told everyone. That's what I had to tell everyone, including my own daughter." Jack helped Emma sit up on the sofa, keeping one protective arm around her shoulders. "Ma'am, I don't understand what you're saying. Catherine mourned her mother her whole life. She kept that necklace as the only thing she had left of her family. And I gave her that necklace on her 15th birthday, Ruth said, pointing to the turquoise pendant that still rested in Emma's small palm. "I saved for 6 months to buy it from a Navajo trader who came through town. The turquoise came from a mine in New Mexico, and I had it set in silver by the best metalsmith in Denver." Ruth stood up and walked to a wooden chest that sat beneath the front window. She opened it and withdrew a small framed photograph, which she brought back and showed to Jack and Emma. The photograph was old and slightly faded, but it clearly showed a younger Ruth Patterson, standing beside a teenage girl who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Emma. The girl in the photograph was wearing the same necklace that Emma now held. This was taken in 1872, just before Ruth's voice broke, and she had to pause to compose herself. "Just before I had to make the hardest decision of my life." Emma looked up at her father with wide, questioning eyes. "Papa, is she really my grandmother?" Jack studied the photograph, comparing the girl in the image to his memories of Catherine. The resemblance was undeniable. The same dark hair, the same brown eyes, the same delicate features that Emma had inherited, but he was still struggling to understand how Catherine could have believed her mother was dead. "Mrs. Patterson," Jack said carefully, "I need you to explain what happened. Why would Catherine think you had died?" Ruth returned to her chair and took a deep breath, as if preparing to tell a story she had never expected to share. "In 1872, I was married to a man named William Patterson. He was a mining engineer, and we lived in a small town called Silver Creek, about 100 miles north of here." She paused, looking out the window toward the desert landscape. "William was a good man, but he had a weakness for gambling. At first, it was just small stakes, poker games with the other miners. But as the silver started running out and people became desperate, the games got bigger and more dangerous." "What happened?" Jack asked. Though he was beginning to suspect, he knew the direction this story was heading. "William got in over his head with some very dangerous men, gunfighters and outlaws who had come to Silver Creek looking for easy money. He owed them more than we could ever pay, and they made it clear that they would collect their debt one way or another." Ruth's hands trembled as she continued. "One night, they came to our house. They said if William couldn't pay what he owed, they would take it out on his family. They threatened to." She glanced at Emma and chose her words carefully. "They threatened to hurt Catherine and me in ways that no woman should ever have to endure." Jack felt his blood run cold as he understood the implications of Ruth's words. In the lawless mining towns of the 1870s, such threats were often carried out without mercy or consequence. "William panicked," Ruth continued. "He came up with a desperate plan. He told me to take Catherine and run, to get as far away as possible. But he said the men would follow us unless they believed we were dead. So he set fire to our house one night when everyone thought we were sleeping inside. Dear God," Jack whispered, "Catherine and I hid in the root cellar behind the House while William made sure everyone saw him trying to rescue us from the flames. When the fire died down, he found some burned remains, animals that had died in the fire, and told everyone that his wife and daughter had perished. Ruth wiped her eyes again, her voice growing stronger as she continued. The plan worked. The dangerous men left town, believing their debt died with William's family. But I knew we could never return, never risk being discovered. So I took Catherine and we traveled south, settling in a small farming community in Colorado. But why didn't you stay together? Emma asked, her young voice filled with confusion and sadness. Because I was sick, child. I had consumption, what doctors call tuberculosis now. I was getting weaker every month, and I knew I was dying. I didn't want Catherine to watch me waste away, and I was terrified that my illness would spread too. Ruth reached out and gently touched Emma's cheek. So I made another terrible decision. I found a good family in Colorado, the Hendersons, who were willing to take Catherine in. I told her I was going to Denver for medical treatment, and I made the Hendersons promise to tell her that I had died in the hospital there. You left her, Jack said, his voice carrying a note of accusation, despite his efforts to remain neutral. I saved her, Ruth replied firmly. Catherine was 17 by then, old enough to make her own way in the world, but young enough to build a new life. The Hendersons treated her like their own daughter. She learned to read and write properly, learned household skills that served her well as a frontier wife. But she grieved for you her entire life, Jack protested. She used to cry on your birthday every year, wishing she could visit your grave. Ruth's face crumpled with pain. Do you think it was easy for me? Do you think I didn't grieve too, every day for the past 13 years? I've wondered about my daughter. I've imagined what her life was like, whether she was happy, whether she ever thought about me with anything other than sorrow. Emma had been listening to this exchange with growing distress. Papa, why are you angry with Grandmother Ruth? She was trying to protect Mama. Jack looked down at his daughter and realized that his own pain and confusion were frightening her. He took a deep breath and tried to moderate his tone. I'm not angry, sweetheart. I'm just trying to understand, and I'm trying to explain. Ruth said, after I left Catherine with the Hendersons, I didn't die as expected. The Arizona climate helped my lungs heal, and I slowly recovered my health. By the time I was strong enough to travel back to Colorado, Catherine had married and moved away. The Hendersons told me she had gone to Kansas with her new husband. Why didn't you try to find her? Jack asked. Because she believed I was dead, and I thought it would be cruel to disrupt her new life. I convinced myself that she was better off without me, that my return would only cause her pain and confusion. Ruth stood up and walked to the window again, looking out at the desert landscape that had become her home. So I settled here in Copper Creek, using the skills Catherine's father had taught me about mining and metallurgy to help run a small silver operation. When the silver played out, I stayed anyway. This place had become my home, and I had built a life here. A lonely life, Emma observed with the straightforward honesty of a child. Yes, Ruth admitted, a very lonely life. But I told myself it was the price I had to pay for the choices I had made. She returned to the sofa and sat down beside Emma. And now, 13 years later, my granddaughter has fainted from hunger in my arms, wearing the necklace I gave to her mother 20 years ago. Tell me that isn't the work of divine providence. Jack watched as Emma studied her grandmother's face, clearly trying to process this overwhelming revelation. Grandmother Ruth, she said slowly, does this mean we don't have to go to California anymore? The simple question cut straight to the heart of their situation. They had been traveling west in search of a new life, fleeing poverty and tragedy. Now they had discovered family they never knew existed, in a place they had stumbled upon purely by chance. That depends on your father, Ruth said, looking at Jack with hope and uncertainty in her eyes. I can't give you back the years I lost with Catherine, but I can offer you and Emma a home here, if you're willing to accept it. Jack looked around Ruth's comfortable house, thought about their empty wagon and their uncertain future, and most importantly, looked at his daughter's face for the first time in months. Emma looked hopeful rather than afraid. Mrs. Patterson, Jack said formally, I think Catherine would want Emma to know her grandmother, and I think we would be honored to accept your offer." As Ruth Patterson embraced her granddaughter for the first time, both of them crying tears of joy and relief, Jack silently thanked whatever force had brought them to this remote corner of Arizona territory. Their desperate journey had led them, not just to survival, but to family healing, and the possibility of building something better from the ashes of their previous losses. The turquoise necklace that had been passed from mother to daughter had finally brought them all home. 3 days had passed since Emma's collapse, and the shocking discovery that Ruth Patterson was her grandmother. The small house with green shutters had become a sanctuary for the Morrison family, filled with the warmth of good food, comfortable beds, and the tentative beginnings of a relationship that none of them had dared to hope for. Emma was recovering quickly from her bout of hunger and exhaustion, her natural 8-year-old resilience aided by Ruth's careful attention to proper nutrition and rest, but the emotional healing would take longer for all of them as they navigated the complex feelings surrounding Catherine's death and the years of separation that could never be recovered. On this particular morning, Jack sat on Ruth's front porch, drinking real coffee and watching Emma play in the garden with a stray cat that had adopted them all. The sight of his daughter laughing and running around filled him with relief, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was an intruder in this reunion between grandmother and granddaughter. "She looks more like Catherine every day," Ruth said, joining Jack on the porch with her own cup of coffee. "Yes, she does," Jack agreed, "especially when she smiles. Catherine had that same way of lighting up a room." Ruth settled into the rocking chair beside him, and for a moment they sat in comfortable silence, watching Emma chase the cat around the vegetable garden. "Jack," Ruth said finally, "I need to ask you about Catherine's last days. I need to know if she was happy, if she suffered, if she," Ruth's voice broke slightly, "if she ever spoke about me." Jack had been dreading this conversation, but he knew Ruth deserved to know the truth about her daughter's final months. "She was happy with our life in Kansas, especially after Emma was born. Catherine was a wonderful mother and a devoted wife. She loved the farm, loved teaching Emma to read and cook and take care of the animals." But, Ruth prompted, sensing there was more to the story. "But she was also haunted by the loss of her family. She talked about you often, especially when she was pregnant with Emma. She said she wished her mother could be there to help her, to teach her how to be a good mother herself." Ruth wiped tears from her eyes. She was already a good mother. "I could see that from the way she raised Emma, even if I never got to witness it myself. When the drought hit and we started losing everything, Catherine became very sad," Jack continued. "She blamed herself for not being able to help more, for not knowing how to make things better. And when she got sick that last winter," Jack paused, the memories still painful after more than a year, "she kept saying she wished she could see her mother one more time, that she wanted to apologize for something, though she never said what." "Apologize?" Ruth looked confused. What could she possibly have to apologize for? "I never understood it either. But in her final days, when the fever was very high, she would talk to you, as if you were in the room. She would say things like, 'I'm sorry, Mama. I should have been stronger. I should have found a way to stay with you.'" Ruth covered her face with her hands and wept silently. "She thought she had failed me somehow. Oh, my poor girl. If only she had known that I was the one who failed her." Jack reached over and gently touched Ruth's shoulder. "Mrs. Patterson, Catherine never felt abandoned by you. She thought you had died, remember? She grieved for you, but she never blamed you for leaving her." "But I did leave her," Ruth said, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "I chose to let her believe I was dead rather than face the difficulty of explaining the truth. I was a coward." "You were a mother trying to protect her child," Jack corrected. "Catherine understood that kind of love. She would have done the same thing for Emma if she had to." From the garden, they could hear Emma talking to the cat in the serious tone she used when explaining important things. "You see, Mr. Whiskers, this is my grandmother's house now. That means it's my house too. And you can live here if you want, but you have to be nice to the chickens." Ruth smiled through her tears. "She's already making herself at home. She needs this." Jack said, "She needs family, needs roots. The past year has been very hard on her, "And what about you?" Ruth asked. "What do you need?" Jack considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I need to feel useful again. I need to work, to provide. For Emma, to know that I'm not just accepting charity." Ruth nodded understandingly. "I've been thinking about that. There's plenty of work to be done around here, and I could use a partner in running the mining operation. I don't know anything about mining." Jack admitted, "You can learn. And in the meantime, there's the garden, the chickens' maintenance, on the house and equipment. Plus, Copper Creek could use a school teacher for the children. There are more families moving in as word spreads about the opportunities here." Jack looked surprised. "A school teacher? I'm not qualified for that. Can you read and write? Do you know arithmetic and basic history?" "Yes, but then you're more qualified than most people on the frontier. Emma told me you've been teaching her during your travels. She reads better than most children twice her age." Before Jack could respond, Emma came running up to the porch, her cheeks flushed with exercise and excitement. "Papa, Grandmother Ruth, Mr. Whiskers caught a mouse, and he brought it to me as a present. I think that means he likes me." "I think you're right," Ruth said, pulling Emma onto her lap. "Mr. Whiskers has excellent taste in friends." Emma settled against her grandmother with the easy affection of a child who had already decided to trust this new person in her life. "Grandmother Ruth, will you tell me about my mama when she was little? Papa tells me stories, but he didn't know her then." Ruth's eyes lit up. "Oh, I have so many stories about your mama. She was very much like you, curious about everything, always asking questions, always trying to help with grown-up tasks." "Really? What was her favorite thing to do?" "She loved to read," Ruth said, stroking Emma's hair, "just like you do. But she also loved to cook and take care of animals. We had a milk cow named Bessie, and Catherine insisted on helping with the milking every morning, even when she was only 6 years old." Emma's eyes widened. "Mama knew how to milk a cow when she was 6. She did indeed. And she made the best cornbread you ever tasted, even when she was your age." As Ruth continued telling stories about Catherine's childhood, Jack felt some of his lingering resentment begin to fade. He could see how much Emma needed these connections to her mother's past, these glimpses into a history that had been lost to them. "Papa," Emma said suddenly, turning to look at him, "can we stay here, please? I like having a grandmother, and Mr. Whiskers needs someone to take care of him." Jack looked at Ruth, who was watching him with hopeful but patient eyes. "Are you sure you want us? We don't have much to offer except willingness to work hard." "Jack Morrison," Ruth said firmly, "you are my daughter's husband and the father of my granddaughter. You are family. This house has been too quiet and too empty for too many years. Having you and Emma here would be a gift to me, not a burden." "But what about the mining operation? You said you could use a partner, but I don't have any money to invest." Ruth smiled. "The investment I need isn't money. It's someone I can trust. Someone who will help me build something lasting that can be passed down to Emma someday." Emma clapped her hands together. "Does that mean yes? Does that mean we can stay?" Jack looked at his daughter's hopeful face, then at Ruth's kind eyes, and finally out at the desert landscape that was beginning to feel like home. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I think we can stay." As the three of them sat together on the porch, watching the sunset over the Arizona mountains, Jack realized that their desperate flight from Kansas had brought them to something they had never expected to find: not just survival, but family, purpose, and the chance to build a future together. Catherine's necklace had indeed brought them home, though not in any way they could have imagined. And somewhere in the desert evening, Jack could almost feel his wife's presence, approving of the choice to stay with the mother she had mourned her entire life. 6 months had passed since Jack and Emma Morrison had arrived in Copper Creek, and the small mining settlement had begun to feel like a real community. Word had spread about Ruth Patterson's successful mining operation and the opportunities available in the area, bringing new families to the region and creating the need for schools, churches, and other services that marked a growing town. Emma was thriving in her new environment. She had gained weight, her cheeks were rosy with health, and her laughter could be heard throughout Ruth's house from morning until night. She had also become something of a local celebrity, as the children of Copper Creek were fascinated by her stories of traveling across the country in a covered wagon. Jack had proven to be a natural teacher, and the one-room schoolhouse that the community had built was filled each day with children, eager to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. He had also become Ruth's partner in running the mining operation, discovering a talent for managing the financial and logistical aspects of the business. But most importantly, the three of them had become a real family, bound together by love, shared purpose, and the memory of Catherine Morrison. On this particular morning in early spring, Ruth was teaching Emma how to make bread in the kitchen while Jack reviewed the accounts for their latest mining venture. The house was filled with the warm aroma of baking and the comfortable sounds of family life. "Grandmother Ruth," Emma said as she kneaded the dough with serious concentration, "I want to ask you something important." "What is it, sweetheart?" Emma paused in her work and looked up at her grandmother with Catherine's brown eyes. "I want to know if you think Mama knows that we found each other." Ruth stopped her own work and considered the question carefully. It was not the first time Emma had asked about her mother, and Ruth had learned that the child's questions often revealed profound thoughts about life, death, and family. "I think she knows," Ruth said finally. "I think your mama guided you and your papa here, somehow. There were too many coincidences, too many things that had to go exactly right for us to find each other." "I think so too," Emma agreed. "And I think she's happy that we're taking care of each other now." Jack looked up from his ledger books, listening to this conversation with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. In the months since Catherine's death, he had struggled with questions about fate, purpose, and whether there was any meaning to be found in tragedy. Finding Ruth had begun to answer some of those questions. "Papa," Emma said, noticing his attention, "will you help me write a letter to Mama? I want to tell her about our new life here." "Emma," Jack said gently, "you know Mama can't read letters anymore." "I know she can't write back," Emma replied with 8-year-old logic, "but I think she can still hear us when we talk to her, and I have a lot of things to tell her." Ruth wiped flour from her hands and sat down at the kitchen table. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Emma. What would you like to say to her?" Emma climbed onto a chair and took the pencil and paper that Jack handed her. For several minutes, she wrote carefully, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration as she formed each letter. "Dear Mama," she read aloud when she was finished, "I found Grandmother Ruth, and she is wonderful. She teaches me how to cook and tells me stories about when you were little. Papa is happy here too. He teaches school and helps with the mine. We have a cat named Mr. Whiskers and chickens and a garden. Grandmother Ruth says I look like you, and that makes me proud. I wear your necklace every day and think about you. I hope you are not sad anymore. I love you, Emma." Ruth had tears in her eyes as Emma finished reading. "That's a beautiful letter, darling. Should we put it somewhere special?" Emma thought for a moment. "I want to bury it in the garden, next to the rose bush. That way it can grow into something pretty." "I think that's perfect," Jack said, his own voice thick with emotion. As they prepared to hold their small ceremony in the garden, Ruth opened the wooden chest where she kept her most precious belongings. She pulled out the framed photograph of herself and teenage Catherine, along with several other items that Emma had never seen before. "Emma," Ruth said, "I want to give you something that belonged to your mama." She handed Emma a small leather-bound diary. "Catherine kept this during the last year we lived together. I found it after she left with the Hendersons, and I've been saving it for someone who would appreciate it." Emma opened the diary carefully and began to read the faded entries. In her mother's careful handwriting, the pages were filled with thoughts about daily life, dreams for the future, and frequent expressions of love for her mother. "I hope Mama gets better soon." Emma read aloud from one entry. "I want to take care of her the way she has always taken care of me. I want to make her proud and show her that all the things she taught me have made me into someone good." Ruth smiled through her tears. "She did become someone good, Emma. She became an amazing woman, a loving wife, and a wonderful mother, and now she's given me the greatest gift I could ever receive, you." That evening, as the sun set over the Arizona desert, 3 generations of women gathered in Ruth's garden to bury Emma's letter and plant new seeds in the rich soil. Jack watched from the porch as his daughter and her grandmother worked side by side, their hands dirty with earth and their faces bright with hope. The turquoise necklace glinted in the fading light as Emma bent over the rose bush, carefully patting soil around the buried letter. It was the same necklace that had passed from Ruth to Catherine, and now from Catherine to Emma, a symbol of love that had survived separation, loss, and the harsh realities of frontier life. "Grandmother Ruth," Emma said as they finished, "they're planting when I grow up and have children. Will you teach them about Mama too?" "If God grants me that many years," Ruth replied, "I will tell them all about their grandmother Catherine, and about their great-grandmother who made hard choices out of love, and about how a little girl's courage and a simple necklace brought a family back together as the stars began to appear in the desert sky." Jack Morrison reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a desperate flight from poverty and loss had become a story of redemption, family, and the enduring power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. The turquoise necklace that Emma wore so proudly had indeed been their guide home, not to a place, but to the family they never knew they had. Catherine's legacy lived on not just in her daughter, but in the reunion she had somehow orchestrated from beyond, bringing together three people who needed each other more than they had ever realized. 6 months later, as Copper Creek celebrated its first official town charter, the Morrison-Patterson family stood together on their front porch, watching the festivities with pride and contentment. Emma was teaching the younger children songs that Ruth had taught her. Jack was discussing plans for a new school building with the other settlers, and Ruth was finally at peace with the choices she had made so many years ago. The past could not be changed, but the future stretched before them bright with possibility, and in Emma's small hands, Catherine's necklace caught the Arizona sunlight, a reminder that love transcends death, that families can be rebuilt from ashes, and that sometimes the longest journeys lead us exactly where we were meant to be.